Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Itential webinar. I'm excited to have you join me for today's live demo on orchestration of cloud load balancing services using AWS CloudFormation systems combined with ServiceNow and notifications using the Itential Automation Platform. My name is Joaquin Flores. I am a senior solutions architect here at Itential. Today, I'll be walking you through step by step how the Itential Automation Platform can help to orchestrate cloud services by combining native APIs, but also native infrastructure as code functionality, such as CloudFormation. Here at Itential, we believe firmly on using the right tool for the right job. There's a lot of tooling for cloud automation and infrastructure as code, such as CloudFormation, OpenTofu, Azure ARM templates, etc. We firmly believe in combining those through the power of API integration to achieve your goals. There is no right or wrong tool. Sometimes we have to use some of these tools or even some of the native tooling that exists in, for example, EC2 APIs and so forth. And the whole idea behind this is to show how using the Itential Automation Platform and all the provided integrations, you can implement your business logic for your use cases. The idea behind this demo is to demonstrate how we can orchestrate using the platform, integrating all these services that we discussed before, using CloudFormation, even native API calls from the platform itself, but not only so, as well as integration with ServiceNow change management, approvals, Microsoft Teams notifications, and also, very importantly as well, leverage Itential stateful capabilities to implement day two operations on the services that we're going to create. So that'll be the latter part of the demo. At the end of the demo, you will have seen the capabilities Itential provides and also how we help our customers achieve their X as a service goals for all their IT systems. We focus sometimes a lot on networking, but we also have a lot of capability and do a lot of work with our existing customers around security, cloud automation, infrastructure work, etc. And today we're going to show that. In the past few years, software developers and their tooling have gotten very sophisticated. DevOps processes involving pipelines have evolved to be very effective when the developer builds the code. They do code sanity testing, linting, code gets merged, it gets tested through a pipeline, and it also gets deployed through a pipeline to an end system a lot of times. When it comes to infrastructure and more specifically network infrastructure, there is a bunch of places where we face bottlenecks, and this is something that we discuss a lot with our existing customers, especially when it comes to orchestrating the network infrastructure pieces along with the required approvals and the rest of the system requires to affect a particular change. After an application is deployed to a particular server, or in this case, an EC2 instance, right? So this is the starting point of today's discussion is we have an application that has been coded, it's been deployed to an EC2 instance in AWS. There is a bunch of stuff that needs to happen before that application gets published. We have to provision load balancers. We have to create load balancer policies and health checks, etc. We have to allocate public IPs. Sometimes we have to have those public IPs be recorded in our Infoblocks tools or our IPAM tools internally. DNS records have to be created and advertised using our preferred DNS providers. And SSL certificates need to be created and designed. A lot of that work is most times not implemented within the pipeline tooling that the developers use, and they use disparate systems that need integration through APIs. AWS CloudFormation, among other infrastructure as code tools, offer mechanisms to automate the infrastructure, which is great. So a lot of these changes we can do with CloudFormation, but integrating it with other systems when it comes to following the organization's process, such as using ServiceNow for approvals and keeping track of changes, perhaps integrating with notification systems like we're going to show today, like Microsoft Teams, maybe integrating with IPM toolings, as I mentioned before, and others, is a big challenge. And this is something that we work with a lot of our customers to solve. Sometimes our customers use cloud management platform tooling, which is great and it helps a lot with some of these motions of creating the infrastructure. But then again, when you start putting these things through the business process where you have to execute approvals and record changes and perhaps leverage things such as CMDBs and so forth, then those tools start kind of falling off on their faces. And this is where we think Itential brings a lot of value to this entire process. In this demo, we're going to showcase Itential's capability not only to integrate with cloud native infrastructure as code tools such as CloudFormation and others, but also how do we orchestrate over the top to integrate change management, as I mentioned before, with ServiceNow and notification systems. Itential, specifically the platform itself, will be in charge of creating a change request in ServiceNow, as well as documenting the change and wait for the change approval. So one of the things we'll do is we'll actually launch the automation. We'll see the ticket being created in our notifications. We will actually go through the change approval motion of moving the ticket to review and executing the approvals on the proper approvals. We will actually also see how the platform will document the ticket along the way, and we'll add updates to it depending on the different steps that the automation moves through. We will have that integration with Microsoft Teams to track the state of the request. And later, we could discuss how the Itential Automation Platform, specifically using the Lifecycle Manager functionality, can track the state of the service after the fact, after it's been deployed, and we can discuss how we can implement day 2 actions on that resource that we have deployed. For the CloudFormation bit, which is what Itential will be orchestrating over, we will trigger a stack creation that will create a target group in EC2. It will create an HTTPS listener. It will assign a self-signed cert that we have pre-created for this demo. Self-signed certs are best used for the demonstration purposes. The real certificates take quite a long time to deploy, so they're not, for this demo purposes, we're going to rely on a self-signed cert. We're going to create a Route 53 DNS-A record and wait for it to propagate. Allocate an elastic IP in EC2 for the load balancer, and then we'll tie it all together with the load balancer itself. So now let's jump into the platform and start looking at the demo. Okay, so this brings us back into the Itential Automation Platform using Operations Manager. And here we have a few things that I want to key on a little bit before we go ahead and launch the automation. So this automation, I have created a form that we're going to use to launch this. This form can be used for triggering the automation manually directly from Operations Manager, which can become the operator portal for users that want to leverage this automation as a service. Or this form can also be exported to other systems, as has been demonstrated before on previous webinars, using our ecosystem applications such as ServiceNow. But also, one important thing that I wanted to key on this that we're not going to show, but also the capability exists here, is that I have created an API trigger. The Itential Automation Platform gives you the ability to reuse a particular automation in many ways. And one of them is I can create that manual trigger as I specified, but I can also create an API route for this service, which means that now for that developer that is using that pipeline to perhaps deploy their application to the infrastructure and to the EC2 instance, for example, in this case, they can actually integrate that request into their pipelines, and they can call the Itential Automation Platform on this particular route here and in a pre-negotiated payload in order to launch this automation and consume it as a service. So just keep that in mind as we go throughout here, that there's multiple ways of triggering this use case, and we can go ahead and leverage it that way. So we're going to go ahead and launch our automation to get started with the actual demonstration. So I'm going to provide some data that I need here. Let's see, this is going to be webinar app. And we're going to call it webinar application. And this is very important. This will actually be what we use for our DNS And this is what's going to be allocated as part of the Route 53A record that we will see later on pop up in our Microsoft Teams notifications. Our EC2 instance, we're going to use a demo instance that we have created already. It has a web server. It's fairly basic. It's just posting a single web page, but it gets the idea across. For our VPC, we're going to use the SE Lab VPC. These are all correct. SE Lab Demo Subnet is the one that we want to use. And security group is going to be SE Lab. Now, one of the things that I also want to highlight is these here, the VPC, subnet, security group, as well as the instance, all these fields can be API calls into your AWS API, which means that I can pull directly from what's provisioned over there. So I can provision an infrastructure piece in AWS with my application code deployed in it and dynamically pull what that EC2 instance is from AWS directly and populate it on that form. So that's an important piece to highlight as well. So that can be enabled there. Business justification, I will populate here. This will actually be used on our ServiceNow change request, and it'll be used by our approvers if we were using this as a normal request. Okay, so we have our business justification populated, and let's verify that all our inputs look good, and we can go ahead and launch this automation. Now we'll see messages being populated on the right here in my Microsoft Teams notifications change window. The first thing that will happen is we're actually going to go ahead and create a change request into ServiceNow and wait for the approval. So as you can see here on my Microsoft Teams window, I get my notification, and this is an HTML window that will actually give me links to my ticket. So this could be sent to a chat room where approvers sit and review, or this could be changed to management or whomever controls some of these approvals. And I have my description here: service request to provision an Elastic Load Balancer service with DNS. Application is called Webinar App, and my justification is Webinar Load Balancer service for this application. So I'm going to go ahead and click on my ServiceNow ticket. Now I'll probably speed through this and execute the approvals fairly quickly, right? The approval process itself is not necessarily the focus of the webinar, so I'll move through this fairly quick. I'll move these to assess. One thing that's important to also note is that we are populating descriptions and so forth with all the details as well as justifications in the ticket. And that is waiting for approval. So I will go ahead and approve that very quickly here. After this is approved, one thing that you know quickly is my ticket moved into implement. And if I go and see notes, Itential has actually added some notes saying AWS Load Balancer creation request been successfully approved, and the automation itself will actually move the ticket to implement. If I go back here, the automation has progressed past that ticket creation and approval waiting. It's moved, it's updated the ticket and passed the approval, and it's starting to launch the CloudFormation stack creation. One of the things that's super important about executing these orchestration jobs is the fact that we need to validate what we're doing. So the stack creation call itself is pretty quick. It executes fairly quickly, but after it does, the stack creation takes a few minutes. So what we do is we actually have retry logic built into the workflow itself that says if the stack has not been fully created or fully finished, go ahead and reattempt. And this will happen every 30 seconds until we see that this is done. So now let's jump into CloudFormation really quickly just to see what's happening over there. So when I refresh my CloudFormation, I see that my webinar app stack creation is in progress. It has a description here: AWS CloudFormation template, create load balancer, target group, listener, allocate Elastic AP, and attach an instance to a target group. We'll go ahead and drill into this a little bit more. And if we look at events, we can see all the stuff that's happening. So some of these things take a little bit of time. And what we'll do is we'll just watch it and see when it finishes. Okay, so some of the assets that have been created are complete now. We have seen there's a lot of stuff that's going on through here, a bunch of timestamps. And let's look at what resources have been created so far. So at this time, it looks like everything has been done. Let me refresh the page just to make sure that CloudFormation is fully done. Still not done there. Still says creating. Oh, our Red 53 record still in creation. But we can see here that by using this stack creation process, we have allocated all those things that we were discussing earlier during the slide portion of the discussion. So we have allocated a physical IP, an elastic IP for this service. We have created an HTTPS listener for that load balancer with all those attributes that we were using before. And keep in mind also, one of the things that's important is that we're using that application name in a lot of these services and the way that we key them off in during the stack creation. And that's going to be extremely important. We've seen the load balancer service being created and our DNS, which is, I believe, the final piece that should be happening. It's almost done there, as well as our self-signed cert has been matched into the service in the target group. One thing that's super important, so now our service is complete. One thing that's super important to remember is that a lot of these services will actually going to need to record for later, right? So when we start looking at the Itential Automation Platform stateful capabilities, one of the things that we'll look at that's very important is we're going to have to remember a lot of these parameters. Some of these are dynamically created along the way via the automation, or some of these are allocated, such as the URL, right? This FQDN is actually dynamically created via the automation and passed on to CloudFormation, but the Elastic IP is just generated and allocated by AWS services, right? And we have no control over that. So we have to remember some of those so that later we can keep them in our stateful capabilities so that we can do things such as troubleshooting and so forth. Let's jump back into the platform and see what happened over there. So now that we jump back into the platform, we can see that our job actually evaluated a handful of times. We can see how many times it actually took to, so let's see here. It actually took 8 retries, right? So that took about 4 minutes to create the entire service. And what the platform was actually doing was constantly validating that the stack was actually finished creating. When it was finished, it decided to proceed. It described the stack one more time, and it picked out the load balancer Elastic IP. And this is one attribute that we will remember later for our stateful capability showcase. Going back into the parent automation that's controlling this, once this CloudFormation job finishes, right after the 4-minute mark or so, we're actually going to pull some of that data and extract some of the data that's important that we need for later. We're going to update the change request with notes. So let's go ahead and see that now. So I can actually go and look at my change request and see how it was transitioned from implement to review. And this will be the final piece, right? Where this change gets sent to whomever the requester is and said, hey, go ahead and verify that your service is working properly. And we're actually going to go through that in a second. As well as something that's really important is that we're adding notes throughout the whole motion of the automation. If you look at whenever we did that change, that update in the automation platform, using our ServiceNow integration, we have the capability of posting all this data. And notice that this is all HTML, and that's because we're reusing some of the data that we're sending to Microsoft Teams. But you actually have self-documentation of the whole change saying, hey, your application has been published. We have a reference URL, and we also have an Elastic IP that has been allocated. So we have a fully operational port. We have a fully operational website after this, and we'll see that in a second. And from there, we can go ahead and actually jump and see, since this operation is all finished and the change has been updated in ServiceNow, we can actually go and look at Microsoft Teams and see that our load balancer creation service has seen an update, right? Our applications has been published. This is the same message that we saw in ServiceNow. But what's actually cool is we can do things such as, use that HTML capabilities to, from here, facilitate the requester's job and say, hey, this is your application URL. They can go ahead and ping that IP if that was provided initially in the original permissions. But from here, I can actually click on my website link. And like I said before, we're using a self-signed cert for this. This can definitely be used with a certificate signed by a certificate authority. It's not a big deal there. And we got our basic website populated here. So our DNS has been allocated, advertised, and all mapped into all our services. that we created in the AWS portion of it. Going back into Operations Manager, we've seen the Microsoft Teams update is sent. And arguably one of the biggest pieces of this automation, that'll be the second part of this demonstration, is the fact that we actually record the request state. And that's that last tasking here. So this workflow fairly tiny, using a lot of modular automations. A lot of these are actually pre-built. But one of the last operations is this one, which is we're recording the request state. And this will actually leverage Itential Automation's platform lifecycle capability, not only to remember some of the attributes that CloudFormation already remembers. Right? CloudFormation already has a certain state capability, but also come over the top and remember a lot of the request attributes. So if I go to my Lifecycle Manager overview here, now I can see my instance that has been created. And we decided that our instance name was Webinar App, and that's what's being used for this view. I can create multiple instances. So keep in mind that this is a very much a reusable automation. I can use this to tie it to a bunch of, a lot of applications. It could be 10 or 20 or 30 or 100, right? There's no limit to that. And each one of these will create a particular instance. So once this service starts growing and I start building all these, I got to remember some of these attributes and parameters. So one of the things that's really big here, at least for me, is to kind of showcase the attributes that we're able to remember. Not only the things that we're able to submit through the form, but also other things that are super important for this particular change. So we're able to keep track of the instance ID that was used. And this is the application itself that actually has that HTML code running in it. We have the load balancer IP, which is the dynamically allocated by the AWS EC2 service. We have that application name, which is provided by the user. The subnet ID, which was mapped entirely from what we picked. Just keep in mind that when we run this, we actually picked the names of the servers, right, which are the mnemonics. But we also, in the backend, we need to track the IDs, which are the ones that are referred to the actual AWS assets. We remember the VPC ID that was used, that business justification. But more importantly, this is where it comes in, the real value of the tooling here is we're able to remember some of the attributes that are specific to this particular job from the automation platform perspective, not just to CloudFormation. So we're able to tie the two together. So from here, we have the stack name, we have all those things, but we also have the Itential platform job ID. So this is really important for audit logging and tracking purposes. So I can come back and refer to that job ID later on. We also have the security group ID, which was selected at the beginning, the application URL. So now later down the road, 20, 30 days later, 60 days, 100 days later, when my application developer, misses that change request, or they missed the notification, somebody has misplaced it, or they're trying to figure out what this application is, we can refer to all this data as important to this. I can also track the initiator of the automation. In my case, this is admin at Itential, because I'm not using any particular tie into authentication. But if I was using my email, it would show joxon@itential.com. And here's the initiator. So we can also keep track of who did that. And also very importantly is the change request for ServiceNow. So we can now tie together the different pieces, right? If I need to figure out which service request maps into which CloudFormation service that was permissioned, I have all that information into the platform. The second piece that is super important when we start looking at some of this functionality on the Lifecycle Manager piece of the application are the actions. So based on all this data that I have done here, I can actually implement actions to act on this data as I see fit. So there's a bunch of services that could be implemented, right? After the fact, whenever we create an application and it is published, there's a bunch of stuff that needs to be done to it. And there's potential for a lot of that to be automated, because now we can remember a lot of those attributes and we can act on them. One of those is we have the creation action, which happens on the automation itself, but we can also implement day two actions such as change DNS record. If after the fact somebody comes and says, I want to modify my DNS record from Webinar app to Joxon's app, then we can come ahead and implement this action. And from here, we can actually go and trigger it for the particular automation. And I'll show you how those are triggered in a second. We can do things such as change as a sales certificate. For this demonstration, we actually used a self-signed certificate, which is obviously shows up as not secured and those kinds of things. If we were to allocate a certificate using a proper certificate authority, we can go ahead and use this automation to change that. We can update the registered targets. If we needed to add um, high availability capability to this application and add other instances to that target group in AWS, the requester or the owner of the application can actually come and do it here as a service rather than them having to go to the cloud engineer or the SRE or whomever to actually go and execute those changes on the stack, right? And typically there's a gap there, right, where the application developer will not have the appropriate access to go and modify their services in AWS. So this platform can become the as a service. And lastly, some of the other sample actions that we programmed in here is the update security group. So I can actually have addition and removal of rules to security groups. Say that I need to open, instead of opening just 443 for that application, which is what we're using right now for that load balancer listener, I needed to open some other URL for that application, perhaps for troubleshooting purposes and so forth. And lastly, we have a delete action, which actually lets me execute a CloudFormation delete on the, and that will destroy the whole service. Namely, all those assets that we saw before that were created, right? I can actually issue a delete on this because I have the stateful capability. And rather than relying on that in Cloud Engineer, I can actually do it from the Lifecycle Manager app or from the Itential Operations Manager and delete all these services and decommission my application when the time comes to do that. That wraps up the demo. Let's go back into the slides and kind of discuss everything that we've showed so far. Okay, so during the demo, we showcased how the Itential platform can seamlessly integrate with cloud-native tooling like CloudFormation, orchestrate the entire process very efficiently. We demonstrated how IAP can orchestrate, including things such as create and change change management integration with ServiceNow and update that change, adding documentation, wait for approvals, using Microsoft Teams notifications integrations, use CloudFormation to automate the essential creation of the entire services. One of the other things that I would like to add here is that this does not have to be specifically CloudFormation. This is something that can be done with Azure ARM templates, like discussed before. It can be done with things such as OpenTofu and Terraform and so forth, right? Any of the infrastructure as code tools that are out there in the market can be integrated in such a way into the platform so that you can execute all that service orchestration and start creating use cases as a service. This holistic approach not only addresses the bottleneck, but also streamlines the entire deployment, exposing it as a service and ensuring that we're actually validating and executing that publishing of the application of those assets as a service. By leveraging Itential stateful capability, we can also implement those day two operations that we mentioned before, ensuring that we can actually manage those deployed resources in an automated fashion. In conclusion, Itential helps our customers achieve their as a service goals across various IT systems. It could be network load balancer, it could be an F5 load balancer, it could be a cloud load balancer, security services, cloud, by automating the entire infrastructure from A to Z and integrating with that cloud management process. Thank you for watching, and thanks for tuning in.